Hello, hello. It is Tuesday night with the People's Pride Project, and that means it is another couch conversation. Tonight, my guest that I'm so glad has taken the time and found it in her heart to come and sit down with me is Laura Quainoo, founder of CHOSA, or CHOSA Nation, rather. And we're going to get into what that is. It's the concept in and of itself is beautiful to me because naming and the act of naming has always been important, especially to people of African diaspora, but throughout the world historically. What you call yourself or what you call someone isn't just about, oh, what sounds good. It carries weight, it has meaning, it ties you to something. And the idea of, well, what are we calling ourselves here and now, and why should that matter? So, Laura, I think you can take it from there.
Well, and that's exactly why I came up with CHOSA, is because I see so much conversation about, are we Black? Are we African American? Are we this? Are we that? And in so many categories, sometimes there are people who are left out of that. If you're not from a certain country, you can't identify as this. If you don't look a certain way, you can't identify as that. If you have parents from two different backgrounds, then you can't identify as this and that. And just the way that I look at it is we all come from the same root. We all come from Africa. We all come from people who were brought here in chains. And there needs to be something that we can all kind of tether ourselves to know that when we're dealing with each other, we're dealing with people from a similar experience. The same thing with people who are in different countries, who may have different ways of expressing themselves, but they still come from that same root. The ships drop them off in different locations, but they're still a part of the same experience. And so I wanted something that could kind of encapsulate all of that and make sure that nobody's left out and just give us sort of a common place where we could start and say, okay, this doesn't negate anything else that we were before we started identifying as CHOSA, and I've said this multiple times online. I'm still Black. I don't identify as African American, but I don't have any problems with other people calling me African American. It's just not something I ever got used to saying. I've always been Black. So, it doesn't negate whatever else you were, but it just is, like I said, just a common place where we can come together and say, we're all children of stolen and sold Africans. So now how do we come together around the world? And as powerful as we are here in the US in terms of our activism and the noise that we make that gets so much attention around the world, be it through Black Lives Matter or even the civil rights movement of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we get a lot of attention here in the US, which is wonderful. But there's so many other CHOSA all over the world who also need attention and who don't have the voice and don't have the cameras on them and who haven't made the ruckus that we've made, whether it's because of low numbers or the systems they're dealing with or whatever. And I just feel like if we could all come together, whether it's in Brazil or Jamaica or Venezuela or Mexico or wherever, but if we could all come together under a common banner, then we have more power on the world stage as well as in our respective countries. So that's just kind of the background story of how CHOSA got started.
Do you feel like it's almost, we use the word diasporic now, or people of the diaspora, or
Mm-hmm.
prior to that we were more like, oh, okay, it's pan-Africanism. Is
Mm-hmm.
it's do you feel like it falls in line with that sort of lineage and actually, I guess, gives it a tether
Absolutely.
sense?
Absolutely. In fact, I have a website and another Instagram page that's dedicated to the Black to Africa movement. It's kind of a nod to Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement, except for I call it Black to Africa movement. And it was in doing a lot of work with that and talking to people and writing. I'm just a writer by nature, and writing about it and questions that I was getting, that's when I sat down and said, wait a minute, we need something like what I just described with CHOSA, but it came out of that whole conversation. It was just kind of something that just organically, you know, grew out of what was already out there, and so it's not separate from any of those things. It's inclusive of all of those things, but absolutely it's related.
My next question would have been, how did you settle on those particular words?
That's a good question. And it's something that I haven't thought about in a while. And I should have probably written it down when I first came up with it, because I do remember sitting at the computer and playing around, but I don't even remember like the list of things that I was considering. It was just when I came up with it, I said, okay, it's short. It's pretty easy to say, it's easy to remember. And I don't know. It struck me, in my spirit that this is it, and I started to at one point, because people have asked me, like, is this like a new tribe or something that you're trying to start? And, I always tell them, no, I've heard that there's issues with tribe, just the word tribe and its root in colonialism, and, how white people have always kind of portrayed tribalism in terms of savagery and things like that. So I just knew I didn't want that. I know a lot of people don't have any issues at all with the word tribe, but I didn't want that. And so I just was thinking, like, what would go dope with that? And that's when I came up with CHOSA Nation, which again, CHOSA is the main word that anyone, can use and hopefully will use. But then CHOSA Nation is what I came up with for like my Instagram handle, and, other things that I'm planning in the future, website and things like that will all be related to CHOSA Nation. I just felt like, like it sounded good. And also, now that I'm talking to you, I'm remembering the click language, I can't do it, but how they do in South Africa, it kind of reminded me of that. And I think that's when someone asked me, like, so is this like a new tribe or something? Because I had mentioned that. And I'm like, no, it's not a tribe, but it kind of is, just in terms of the concept that it's all of us. We are Africans, but we're Africans with a unique experience, in that most of us have never even been to the continent, much less were we from the continent. But we are still rooted in that through our ancestry, our bloodline, our DNA, everything points to Africa. And so I just felt like CHOSA was kind of similar to SOSA, or however you say it. I can't even say it. It's the clicking language is what I always say. It was similar to that, different part of where we probably came from, but it was still grounded in the continent. And I just liked it. So it just spoke to my spirit and it stuck.
So, is this something that you're looking for people to adopt amongst themselves, or is this part of, when you envision it, a broader sort of scenario? How does this fit into where we are as Black people or diasporic people now?
It's definitely for the culture. It's for everybody. If you come from this experience, like I said earlier, I don't care what part of the world, if you're from Great Britain or, wherever you're from, if your ancestors arrived there, enslaved and in chains, then you are CHOSA. And that is what I would like to see people, again, not negating anything else that a person may be, but that's what I would like to see people begin to use to not just identify, but unify, because again, different parts of the world, we may call ourselves different things, but this is kind of like um, a umbrella term, so to speak, that would encompass all of those, so that we know what we're dealing with. And in fact, just earlier today, I wrote an article about kind of putting geographical tags before CHOSA, that I may say I'm American CHOSA, or someone else may say, I'm Latin CHOSA, or I'm British CHOSA, or something like that. That's not necessary, but if somebody wanted to get specific, they could use it in that way. But I even, a lot of times with, my cousins and things like that, I'll even just use it as just kind of a salutation, hey, CHOSA, what's going on? So it's just kind of something that I would like to see picked up, however people want to use it, as long as they understand what they're saying. and embrace the intention of it in terms of unifying us with everybody. Borders, not being necessarily the thing, because a lot of times we are divided by those things and by languages and religions and things like that. But this is the way that we can all come together and say that we're one people of the same experience.
In broadening this concept, have you received pushback, or what sort of things have you?
Funny, I hadn't until last week, and I hesitate to even bring up what that person said just because I don't want other people to kind of pick it up and run with it. But they were telling me, and I won't name the other organization or the other group, but they said, you're just trying to get rid of this XYZ group. And I was like, how? Like, I'm not trying to get rid of anything or knock anything, out of the way. I'm like, there's space for everybody. And I, in fact, can also identify as this other thing that they were bringing up. And the person never responded, but they wrote me a very kind of, nasty about and it kind of took me back because I'm like, whoa, I hadn't even thought of that, much less was that my intention. But, and again, I don't want to mention it because I don't want other people, how the internet can be. I don't
Right.
want other people to jump on the bandwagon and make problems, not even necessarily for me, but for that other group. We just don't need that kind of, I'm not about the drama, and I'm not about the, this is us over here and you over there. I'm not with that whole thing. So that's the only pushback that I've ever received, and that literally just happened maybe last Thursday or Friday.
Okay.
Yeah,
So we're not here for unnecessary friction, people.
exactly. It's like, don't create some where there isn't any. Like, we have that other organization is doing wonderful work. I support it 1,000,000%. I'm on board with everything that they're trying to do, and it's like, that has nothing to do with me. I'm not even in that lane. You know what I mean? I'm not. They've got momentum and, the things that they're doing. And I don't want to speak about that. I don't want to take away from it. If anything, I just want to do good to help whatever I can. But this is not that. This is totally separate.
So, how does this relate? This, I guess, our collective being, right now. Now we're talking about all of us that have somehow have this root to this, for most of us, faraway land, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate to, I guess, our experience? Like, how do we connect those dots if we're using this heading for everyone?
I'm not sure I understand. How do we connect which dots?
How do we connect the dots in a real sense, other than saying that we're now going to call ourselves CHOSA?
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate? How does that tether us back to something bigger than ourselves?
Well, and I'm looking at my hoodie now, the A is Africa, and I think this is really important too. This is something that a lot of us miss. Um, and this is why I say it grew out of the Black to Africa movement. A
Mhm.
lot of us don't want to be associated with Africa or call ourselves Africans. Um, Unfortunately, because of the damage that's been put on that whole name and the continent and everything else, which, I'm like one, I mean, 1,000,000,000% in love with Africa. I go, as often as I can, would love to live there eventually. Don't have an issue at all with identifying myself as African. I understand that a lot of people do, however. And so to me, Chosa is kind of, it's a nod to the ancestors in that we are children of stolen and sold Africans, but it's also putting right there in the name that we are still Africans. Don't get it twisted that because, we live in the United States or we live in Europe or, wherever, and we've been so many generations removed, we are still African. And to me, that's another purpose of CHOSA, is that connects us. When you talk about connecting the dots, that connects in a small way. It connects that dot because it forces people to think about who we are. And we legitimately are Africans. I've even had this conversation again. Now, this is another place where I've gotten a little bit of pushback, not necessarily in the name CHOSA, but a little bit of pushback not from many Africans, but there's been maybe two or three who have tried to say, you guys are no longer African. The overwhelming majority say that we are African and embrace us as Africa. When I'm in Kenya, they don't necessarily understand it the same as they do in Ghana. But and even in South Africa, I don't think that there was necessarily the connection. But in Ghana, which is the only West African nation I've been to, they definitely understand and embrace us as Africans. But again, getting back to the small few who have tried to say, and they've mostly been online, and you know how people get when they're on their keyboard warrior stuff, that you guys aren't really Africans and so on and so forth. But I mean, the truth of the matter is that we are. Now, we may be Africans from several different nations, because then the question becomes, well, what tribe are you from? Or what, country are you from or something? And first of all, let's not get it twisted. Those borders were created by people who were not us and who do not look like us. Okay. So, borders be darned, so to speak. I don't want to curse on your podcast,
Oh, you
but,
can. It's cool.
borders are not that serious to me. And in terms of tribe, that word again, that's that
Mhm.
old divisive spirit that is, trying to tell us that, oh, we don't have a place because we can't identify with a certain people group or, like I said, some people call them tribes and so on and so forth. But I mean, the truth of the matter is that you do a DNA test on us, you're going to find several African people, several African countries in our bloodstream. So just the fact that we can't identify with one country doesn't mean a whole lot. We are still African, and I want people to identify themselves as African, whether it's through CHOSA, whether it's, just outright saying I'm African, whether it's, understanding that even when you say you're Black, why are you Black? You're Black because you're African. That's not applied to any other people except for people who descend from the mother continent. So it's crazy to me how some people want to deny that, but 1000% that is what I'm hoping to get out of the conversation, that people will begin to see themselves in that way and each other.
Well, the first thing is there are systems and whole ecosystems that benefit on that thought that no, we're not what
Right.
we claim we are. So, of course, there are people that, whether intentionally or just through willful ignorance, are
Mm-hmm.
going to try to push that narrative. But then when those conversations start, it's like, well, then you tell me why it is that we
Right.
can't pinpoint exactly where we're from.
Mm-hmm.
You can say
Exactly.
where your grandmother's, your great grandmother's town in Italy where she came from. Why
Mm-hmm.
can't I do the same?
Yeah.
It's like if you really want to start that conversation, let's have the
Right.
real
Right.
conversation.
Right. Let's have it. Let's have it.
So those are always fun. I am a
Yeah.
bit of an instigator, so I'm like, oh really?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. You go on Medium and you'll see under my articles the comments and the debates that go on and the people who get very angry. At you just identifying yourself as something that they don't control. And it's like, sorry, but this is not about you. This is about me and my people and
Mhm.
where we come from and our experience. So I don't have time for all of the other foolishness. I'll engage if I have a little bit of time. I might engage just to kind of poke at you a little bit. But
Mhm.
besides that, um, I don't have a whole lot of bandwidth for that. It is what it is. And I don't have to explain that to anybody. If you don't understand, okay, keep it pushing, but for those who do, and again, my primary focus is those of us who are CHOSA, for those who do, this is for us. This is not for everybody.
Can we talk about the importance of self naming? Because I feel like so much of our history, especially as Africans in America, Blacks in America, however you choose to identify, whatever. Um, so much of our history has been us being named by others
Yeah.
as, coloreds or Negroes or this or that or whatever these other words were. So, what to you is the importance of saying, no, this is who we are, and this is why we're calling ourselves that, not something that you've put on us.
Yeah. Well, it's empowering and it's taking ownership and control over, your own being, your own destiny. Like I said earlier, it's not something that you have to ask for permission for. It's not something that other people have to approve. This is who we are, period. Whoever doesn't like it can kick rocks. Nothing changes with us. This is who we are. I also think that it was important because right now, and again, this is in the article that I just published this morning, but right now, we have a lot of people who are trying to tell other people within the diaspora, are trying to tell other people who can be this, who can't be that. For example, um, I've had people tell me that you should, and this is recently. Now I'm 55 years old. I've identified as Black my entire life. My family on both sides, my mother and father, goes all the way back. I'm blessed that we have genealogists on both sides of my family. Literally goes all the way back in Africa. I can tell you the name of an ancestor directly from Africa on my father's side. But people will look at me and tell me, you're mixed. You shouldn't even call yourself Black. I'm like, first of all, I'm not asking anybody's permission. I know who I am. I know who I've always been. I know who a lot, not all, but who a lot of my ancestors are. I can tell you exactly where I come from, at least on one side of the family, where I come from. But people will try to tell you, and it's not just me, but they'll try to tell other people the same thing. And my thing is, it doesn't matter what other people say, what other people think. What matters is first how we identify within ourselves. And then it matters in terms of how I'm talking about unity, unifying us, and, CHOSA all over the world coming together. Then it matters how we embrace each other. And so anybody else outside of that who's not interested in unifying, or who's not interested even in identifying themselves according to any African people, it doesn't have to be CHOSA, whatever other title you choose, but anyone outside of that, or anyone who would be inside of that, but who chooses not to, those people I'm not concerned about. In terms of the power of naming yourself, again, that goes to really just taking ownership and taking control of our own identity and our own branding. For a long time, images of us have been portrayed to the world in a certain way, and this has left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth, even people who look like us. I can remember years ago, there were people who were immigrating to the US who didn't want to be associated with being Black, and this is, I don't know how old you are, but I remember like in the 70s, people popping up in the neighborhood or at our schools or whatever. And, I'm looking and I'm like, wow, you're from such and such, you're Black like I am. And, I'm not Black, I'm such and such. And I get it, because of the bad rap that was put on Blackness. And you immigrate to this country because you want to live the American dream, not the Black nightmare, but the American dream. So when you come here and people are telling you, you're Black, you're just like me, and accepting you as Black, which is a wonderful thing, I can understand, because of the images and the things that they were taught coming from other places, that they didn't necessarily want to be associated with that. Today, though, that's changing. Nowadays, everybody is Black, which is an amazing thing. Even in Africa, where before they were identifying, again, according to people groups and countries and things like that. But I'm hearing more and more and talking to more and more Africans who are saying they're Black. And it's like, yeah, we know, we've always known that. But because of that, that public relations that was going on, nobody wanted to be associated. And that's the power in naming yourself, is you get to run your own PR campaign. You get to control your own branding at that point. And we're lit, period. Everybody now wants to be us. They want to be down with us. And we control that. And I think as time progresses, we're going to control a lot more in terms of our narrative and our just the messaging that is put out into the world, and the things that we produce, and the intellectual property and things like that. I see that a change is happening now, and it's such a powerful thing, but it begins first with knowing and understanding who we are and who each other are. And okay, how do we get together and make this powerful group that's already all over the world. They thought that they were going to destroy us by separating us by languages and this and that. But as we're waking up and we're seeing that we're all the same people, it's like, okay, now it's almost like cells. We've got cells now all over the world.
Mm.
Now what? We've got the power to vote in so many different places. We've got, just so much in terms of what we can do if we come together, understanding who we are as a global people.
That's why I like to say people of the global majority.
Yeah,
Because, I mean, I've heard people who have very visceral reactions to being called like people of color,
yeah,
people being called black. Like, the anti blackness has permeated so much of the world's thought process
hmm,
that the idea of, like you were saying earlier, the idea of connecting to each other under that umbrella, because that was supposed to be the umbrella term. It's like, well, we all have this pigment, so everybody's black. No, I'm not, I'm brown. No, I'm not, I'm like, where does that stop?
right, right.
So
And for me, even like when you mention people of color, that's not something that I really, and again, it's like African American. I don't necessarily have a problem with other people
mm,
applying that to me or to us. But like I told a gentleman in Ghana who's from America, but he's decided to live in Ghana, and he was doing, some media things, and he kept referring to us as people of color. And I'm like, bro, you haven't been to the States in a minute. But let me explain to you that people of color are sometimes very anti-Black. And to even put yourself under that banner and not be sure of who you're talking to or what you're dealing with, you might want to kind of rethink that. I'm not telling anybody how to identify. And again, I don't have a problem when people in good faith say, oh, we're all people of color. I'm not one to, well, I don't know. It might depend on the day because I might correct you. But for the most part, if I feel like the intention is good, I'll let that ride. But again, that goes back to saying who we are, and not even letting other people say, well, you're people of color, well, you're this, or you're
mm,
that. Even, I've had conversations with people, even recently, like maybe a week and a half ago, um, people who have issue with us calling ourselves Black because they can't understand that Black is more than a color, and they say Black is something that the white man gave you when he enslaved you, and why are you still going by that? And I'm like, wait, hold up, hold up. When we go back and look at the archives, we were always written in the law and everything else as Negroes. Yes, that word does mean Black, and yes, Black was used, but that was not common parlance in that time. Where
mhm.
that became popularized was with the whole Black Power movement, the Black Panthers. I remember hearing Bobby Seale, one of the founders of the Black Panthers, speaking one time saying that they deliberately chose Black in their name because at that point everybody was calling themselves Negroes and we were being identified as Negroes. And they wanted something that he said Black, frankly, scared white people. So he
Mhm.
said we wanted that because that was our power, standing in naming ourselves and knowing that this name, those who have good intentions don't have a problem with it, but those who didn't have good intentions towards us, that scared the mess out of them. So it was like this power that we have is something that we have to learn how to harness. And it begins in naming ourselves, so a lot of people are going to have so much to say and they're going to have, so much to push back on. And again, CHOSA is not the end all be all, it's for those who get it and who want to identify. I would like for everybody to use the term, who it relates to, obviously, for everybody to use the term. And I'm still trying to think of like, what can I think of for Africans where they're, continental Africans, where they're not necessarily CHOSA, but they are our siblings. And like, can I come up with like CHOSA adjacent or something like that? And it hasn't come to me yet. Maybe somebody else out there listening to this has an idea for that, but just something that says, you know, and not just that we see each other, but that we're bringing our ancestors along with us, that we are their children and we don't want to forget what they went through and we're here because of them. Um, it's an amazing thing, a powerful thing to be able to name yourself. It really is. And all that, it means and all that comes with it and all of the possibilities that go into it. It's just an amazing thing, I think.
I do too. But I'm listening to what you're saying, and part of me is like, okay, now it's time to play devil's advocate, right?
Okay, let's do it.
So, how big was too big of an umbrella? Because we're also living in an age as well. This is what I say I am, so that's what you are. And it's like, no, you're not. You don't live these experiences. You don't. But yes,
Right.
because we are lit and
Mhm.
because we make the whole world cool, I could see it being very easy to, well, I don't have to look like that now. I can just call myself something,
Right.
and now I'm in the club.
Well, here's the thing, and here's where some people may not like this.
Hmm.
Another part of the reason, like I alluded to earlier, is there are some people who will not necessarily look the part, and people will try to tell them, you can't sit with us. And these are people, a lot of them with mixed heritage. My
Hmm.
grandchildren happen to be mixed. And this was another thing that went into the process of what do we do? Because where I want my grandkids to be Black, I have to consider the fact that when they show up in the world, people aren't going to know that unless they tell them. But, and I have to backtrack just a little bit, and don't let me forget where I'm going with this, but I have to backtrack just a little bit and say that one of my ancestors on my mother's side name was Patsy. And there's a long story, and I think I've told it. You may have seen it on Instagram. I know I've written about it in several different places, but there's a long story about Patsy being sold away from two of her youngest children. She had a third child that was an infant. Her last memory was of seeing one of her older children, who was maybe 6 or 7 at the time, holding on to her younger child, and all of them just screaming and crying hysterically at being separated from each other. But she had the infant in her arms. And for some reason, they didn't separate her or weren't able to separate her from that infant. She was made to walk, and I forget the exact states. I've written about this so many times. I know one was Cincinnati. I want to say Mississippi. I can't remember, but she was made to walk from one state to another. They wouldn't even let her ride in the wagon because she refused to give up this baby. And the whole while they kept telling her, throw the baby in the river, get rid of the baby. But she refused, probably in her shock and just in her sheer will of, I'll die before I lose another child. She
Hmm.
held that baby and walked all the way. Well, because she held that baby, my great great grandfather was born. My great grandfather was born. My grandfather, my mother, myself, my son, and now my grandsons. So I have a bracelet, which I should have worn today, but I have a bracelet that says Patsy walked. And that's what gets me through rough times. When I feel like I want to give up, or when I feel like this is just too much, I can't take anymore, I always remember that Patsy walked, that any experience that I go through pales in comparison to what she went through. And not only that, she went through that for a reason. She went through that so that I can be here, so that my son, so that my grandchildren, their children, so on and so forth. She walked for all of us. So, getting back to your story about how broad is that umbrella, as long as people are claiming those ancestors in Africa, for me at least, now, like I said, this is where people may part ways, but for me at least, it's not so much about your aesthetic, it's about how you're identifying yourself and what you connect to. Now, obviously, we're coming up on hopefully reparations, that we're making strides on that. And I also wrote an article recently about a guy who just decided to call himself African American. He doesn't necessarily have any kind of African American lineage or anything like that. But
Right.
because people nowadays can be born as one thing and then start identifying as another, he just, for publicity's sake or whatever his reasoning was, and he didn't even do it the Rachel Dolezal way and even try to mimic, anything resembling Black.
Mhm.
He just decided that in all of his white maleness, he's going to be called African American now. And of course, I got a lot of press, and Facebook banned him and, labeled him as hate speech and so on and so forth, because he's basically playing with our name. And, that got a lot of publicity and whatnot. And it made me start to think, and other people have this conversation about, as we are hopefully coming closer to some kind of resolve in terms of reparations, that people are going to start coming out of the woodworks and saying, oh, well, I got one African ancestor, that I found out about 18 generations ago, so I'm eligible. But when you look at those who talk about reparations, everybody agrees that it's how you've been identifying yourself, not just how you pop up and decide one day because there may be some compensation attached to it, but how you've been identifying yourself, how your family has identified yourself, what you have or what's been, put on your birth certificate and so on and so forth. So it's a wide umbrella for those who choose to be under it, but you have to basically walk the talk, not just show up one day and say, oh, I'm this, because it's cool, or because, like I said earlier, because we're lit and you want to be in with the cool kids. There's a lot of responsibility that goes along with this. And we're pretty good at sniffing people out and saying that, nah, bruh, you just, and even those, there are people in the limelight now who do not look anything like us and who people question, are they really? But those people are out there putting work in. One person in particular, whose name, I won't say because, again, I don't want to start the back and forth thing. But one person in particular who every single day online, there are jokes made about his lineage and how he may not really be Black, but that person is at least out there putting the work in, so I don't know, only his mother and father know, and maybe short of a DNA testing we may never know, but that to me is how wide the umbrella is. Those who are willing to carry the name with honor and willing to put in work on behalf of all CHOSA. And I know that was a very long answer. You have to stop me sometimes because I will ramble.
It's fine. It's fine. It's just, it gives me, and it should give everybody a lot to think about, because we talk about, okay, so how you've lived this experience, which there's 2 points I want to make. First of all, it feels like, especially now, a lot of us as CHOSA or as Black Americans, especially, we feel this need to close the ranks. Like we want to
Yeah,
do this gatekeeping thing. It's like they've taken everything from us, stop giving it to everybody else.
right.
So that seems to almost, as much as we want to unify,
Mm-hmm.
it's also divisive
Yeah,
in a way.
yeah.
And even I feel like that sometimes too. It's like, let us just be our Black selves and everybody else can go do their thing. But
Mm-hmm.
it's always is this weird, it's not even a give and take. Like there's this, I don't even have a word for it right now. But you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. And even in terms of the gatekeepers, uh, a lot of them, I think, have good intentions. I definitely do think that there has to be a bit of just monitoring
Mhm.
of our Blackness, because we know that people will appropriate and take advantage. And, like the guy on Facebook that got banned, there are people who will basically play in our faces like,
Absolutely.
it is what it is, and none of us are with that. But that goes to what I was saying earlier in terms of we're able to sniff that out. And we're able, one thing about us, and this is not to discredit, anybody else anywhere in the world, but one thing about us here in the United States is we aren't with the BS. And if we're uncomfortable, we're making everybody uncomfortable. So, and that's just who we are. I don't know, again, outside of maybe Haitians or Jamaicans, or, I don't know a people who are that much ready to take it to the streets if we need to, and make sure that we stomp out all of the other madness. And you may still feel the way that you do, but you're not going to play with us in a certain way
Mhm.
without, being prepared to really fight and stand on what you believe in, because we know what we believe in. So there is a necessity for a certain amount of gatekeeping. I think we all have a responsibility to do that, though. And what I'm seeing lately is the most vocal people doing the gatekeeping a lot of times are a younger generation who don't necessarily know our history and who have good intentions, but who may not understand, um, even in terms of us calling ourselves Africans and things like that. You know, a lot of times they want to kind of redirect that somewhere else and, say, well, no, we're this and we're that and everything. And if you can prove it, cool. But as far as the masses of us, of what we know and where we come from, and everybody's doing their DNA testing now, it all points to the continent. So, um, yeah, I think that we do have to be very careful. I do think that there is and this thing is always going to be messy. It's never going to be easy. We're never going to have all of the answers, but I think that as long as we're heading in the right direction and we're thinking in the right direction and we're trying to unify, even if we can't agree on everything, if we can agree on just the core concept of who we are and the necessity in not kicking people. We don't have that many people to begin with where we can just kick them out, at least not in the United States. Now, when we're talking globally, that's a little bit different. But this constantly, kicking people. Hey, that's my buddy, RD Shalom. I just saw you pop up his comment. But in terms of, this constantly kicking people out and dividing and saying, if you're on the other side of this border, or if you're, of this thought, or if you're, whatever, if you're of this religion, or if you, think this way about, that you can't be in the group, so to speak, we have to cut that out. We just have to. And hopefully something like CHOSA can be that umbrella that says, hey, this is at least the common core of who we are. And this is tied to Africa, and everything else, go off and be your wonderful selves and all of these other expressions, that you want to embrace. But remember that at the end of the day, we are each other and we have to support one another. And when there's a problem with one of us, there's a problem with all of us. We may disagree internally, but we have to look out for each other. Classic thing is, what we had at the border with, so many Haitians and Africans, trying to cross and even CHOSA from Venezuela and other, Latin American countries trying to cross the border coming to the US and how they were treated. To me, that's something that we all should have been concerned about. A lot of us were saying, no, we don't need that, and I can understand when it comes to jobs and employment and resources and things like that. I can understand that there's some concern, but we got to figure something out. That can't be more important than people's lives being
Right.
endangered, or people not being able to have even a decent quality of life or get education for their children. We have to figure that out. The onus is on us, and we can't continue to go along with these people who don't have our best interest in heart
Definitely.
and kind of siding with them and saying that, yeah, keep them over there. It's like, and again, that's just something that I don't agree with. I'm not disparaging other people, for how they think or, the messages but that's just something that I feel that as CHOSA, we have to start looking with a wider lens and saying that we have to have each other's back. If the answer is not coming over the border, then we have to figure out how to make things better for them over there. But we can't just separate ourselves and say, it is what it is. You get yours how I got mine. That's not the move.
For me, I believe, well, that's not just a belief. A large part of that lies in the fact that we've been so indoctrined into the white supremacist mindset of division and, oh, there's this limited resources that we're all clamoring for, when in reality, it's really not.
Yeah.
And if we look into our lineage, if we look in our our mindset going back before we were not broken but remade in this
Mm-hmm.
American image or a westernized image, that whole concept of looking out for each other was innate. Like
Right.
that's what we did. There was no, oh, don't know. It'd be open arms. Like, what are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that does play a factor, and it's a necessary remembrance that
Mm-hmm.
has to happen. And I feel like, based on what you're saying, a big part of the naming of Chosa, or naming ourselves as Chosa, is connecting to the remembrance.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
That's why I said that, we're bringing the ancestors in, we're bringing the continent in. And then we have to kind of expand our thinking too, because when we do that, where we were just talking a few minutes ago about resources and people thinking there's a limited number of resources. There's no place in the world with resources like Africa has. There's no people in the world with the inner resources that
hmm,
Africans have, the resilience, the strength, the intellect, just so much that is just natural to us, and in bringing in that ancestral realm and bringing in, just our connection to one another and our experience and the grit that was built with that experience, no matter where we are in the world, there's no one, and when you start thinking that way, then you can get out of this box
hmm,
thinking that this is all that we have and we have to protect this little bit that we have. And then you start to realize that this little bit that you have is what they decide to give you,
right,
and this little bit that you have is what they can decide to take away from you. Right now, we're asking for something that is due to us anyway, and I hope that we get it. But if we don't get it, we have to look at what are we left with? What we are left with is a magnificent continent that the world could not exist were this continent, without this continent, without its people, without its resources. The modern world just would not exist. So when we start to look at it that way, like you said, we start to remember who we are. And once we remember who we are, that takes the limits off of any like possibilities for our future, for our children's future, and so on and so forth. It's just we're just an amazing people, and we've survived this terrible thing that we've had to go through, being removed from the continent. But even in surviving that,
hmm,
we've built up so much more that can be of use now, that the continent has also been, terribly degraded because of not just our removal, but colonization and everything else. But
hmm.
we have that wherewithal. If we can come together as a people, we have that wherewithal to make it something magnificent. Well, it already is magnificent, but make it, to where everyone can benefit. We're continental Africans, we're Chosa, we're, the diaspora around the world, where we can all benefit from what we produce, from what is natural in us and what's natural on our continent. So I just feel like we just have to broaden our lens and our sphere and realize the power and influence that we have.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, because that's a major factor of why the People's Pride Project exists. Like I say it all the time, we are the resource. You don't need to ask for permission when you are the battery.
Right.
We've already mentioned we make the world cool. Like, we, not to disregard the influence of others,
Mhm.
but so much of what is mainstream, so much of just everyday living has come either as a perversion or a response to us as
Mhm.
a people, and the things that we've come through, and the resilience that we've had to have.
Right.
So it is, to disregard that is again willful ignorance.
Yeah.
know, Even many moons ago, back in school, it was I had to do this project, and my understanding was, how did we trace music through the diaspora, right? And basically, it can all black music, all diasporic music, you can tell when it's African based
Mhm.
because it comes off of a clave rhythm. Even
Mhm.
though clave is a Spanish word, the rhythmic component underneath all of the music is the same.
Right.
No matter where you go, no matter what we look like, no matter.
Mhm.
So it's that same sort of connected thread. You
Right.
And of course, I don't know why I'm talking to you like you don't, but that's just where I feel like we can't cherry pick what we
Mhm.
feel the connection is. We have to acknowledge the truth of the
Yes.
connection and the
Yes.
fact that it's there, whether we want to acknowledge it or not.
Right. It
Um,
doesn't change anything.
it
It's there.
doesn't.
Mhm.
And before you were talking about basically a lot of our either inclusion or exclusion is based on phenotype for the most
Mhm.
part.
Mhm.
And it had me thinking about, well, what about those of us that were able to pass?
Mhm.
It was bringing up all of these sorts of what ifs and devil's advocate sort of situations, like where do we fit? Do we fit? We're talking
Mhm.
about the reparations argument. Well, you've had 3 generations of CHOSA that have been passing, so now are they still part of the conversation? Like, this thing does become a very large
Yeah.
snowball of how do we untie this knot
Mhm.
that they've created trying to use us against us.
Yeah. And that's the thing, that's when I said that it's messy and there's no simple answer. But what I am starting to see lately, and, I know the Black Lives Matter organization
Mhm.
has been problematic in some ways. People have had a lot to say about the organization. But in terms of the movement, I
Mhm.
think that what it has done by being such a global force is a lot of those same people who were passing or who didn't want to identify. It goes back even to what I was saying earlier about, the early immigrants that I came in contact with as a kid in the 70s, who were, just starting to come from all these different places, but not wanting to identify with Black. Well,
Mhm.
nowadays, when you talk about untying that, people are untying it themselves and coming out and saying, no, I'm actually Black. I remember, and I don't think that this woman ever tried to pass for anything, but I remember there was a woman in college who we were in an African American history class together. And one day and I just thought she was a white chick taking the class, but one day she got up and told her story with pictures and everything. Sis was Black going all the way back. She just had, like, I have a cousin who, looking at her and her mother, who's now deceased, but looking at both of them, you think they're white, but that we know of, there's no white person in our ancestry that we can, say voluntarily somebody was involved with and had these children, yet these genes come out.
Right.
And my cousin just looks white, but her mother actually also looks white and had blue eyes. And it's like no one knows where that came from. It's just, I call them kickback genes. So I think that a lot of, and they never tried to pass, but there were people who have tried to pass who I see now coming out. They're wearing their natural hair. They're identifying with, because I think that they're feeling now with the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's better late than never. It would have been good, if you had done it, 30, 40, 50, 70 years ago, but it's better late than never. But they're coming out now and they're finding, not just coming out and saying I'm Black because they want some kind of reward or accolades, but they're finding value in Blackness. And that's the most important thing. They're feeling like this thing that I was raised to be, to kind of hide, or
Mhm.
feeling like I would get, better treatment in society and that I could access all of this privilege. And they're finding out that that privilege really is not privilege. It's privilege for a certain class, but it's
Right.
not privilege for you folks down here. No matter how you vote and no matter how many times the cop lets you off with just, a warning, you're still not as privileged. It's not helping your day-to-day life. It's not, and I understand that in terms of employment and things like that and wealth gap and things like that. But I'm saying in terms of who you are as an individual, how you feel about yourself, how you relate to the world, knowing that you're kind of hiding this side of yourself is causing a lot of anxiety. It's causing a lot of guilt. It's causing a lot of discomfort. in places where you shouldn't feel uncomfortable. It's causing all of these things that are almost negating the little bit of privilege that you thought that you had. You know what I'm saying? It's not balancing, it's not working for you. So I think that a lot of them are undoing it themselves. But again, like I said earlier, it's still going to be messy. It's still a lot of things that we won't have answers for. It's still a lot that we've got to figure out. But that's the work that we have to do. That's on us. We can't expect anyone else. And even if we don't identify in a certain way, those issues are still going to be there. So it's better to take ownership now and say, this is who we are. We stand 10 toes down for this. This is, moving forward, how we're going to relate to one another. We've got this, unity that we're working on. It's better to do that, because that mess and all of the disorganization and all of the things we don't have answers for and all of the things that are tied up in knots and the people who are doing crazy things, that's always going to exist. So
True.
we have to be focused, and we have to try to get on the same page and say, we're in this together. And now what do we do going forward? When I see my brother or sister hurting over here because, they're having issues with whatever it is, how do we lend our voice to that? What can we do to kind of magnify what they're doing or what they're saying? What can we learn, and how can we take that into our spheres of influence and try to change things for them going forward? Like, what can we do? We have to support each other. And like I said, those issues are going to be there whether we do or whether we don't. So we may as well get on board.
I like the way you phrase that. It's like, listen, suck it up and deal with it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of the brilliance of who we've always been, is that even in our suck it up and deal with it, we've always managed to make magic.
Yeah.
So this will be no different.
Yeah.
It's just another step in the process.
Right.
Um, I don't know if I have any other questions. It's just a lot, not necessarily a lot to think about, because again, this is also a very similar place to where my own heart sits
Mm-hmm.
in this whole collective, like, let's get it together and make it move. We are the global majority. We keep being portrayed as if we're less than, or there's only a few of us. We're not even in pockets. We're everywhere. Melanin is everywhere.
Everywhere.
So I think part of what is really in the remembrance is, it's not just about finding value, it's about recognizing, because I feel like when we say we have to find value, or that we are finding value, if you really, we've been valued and commodified forever.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
That's
this is
how we
not
came here, like James
right.
Baldwin said, through a bill of sale. You
Right.
know, that's our entrance to this whole Western world was through a bill of sale.
Absolutely. So there's
Hmm.
always been a value to blackness. There's always been a value to black bodies. You have people buying bits and pieces of black bodies, or bits and pieces of what they believe black bodies should look like. And black fishing is a very real thing.
Oh yeah.
But I think it becomes not valuing ourselves, but recognizing the inherentness of ourselves, whether it's chosa ness or blackness or whatever we call this essence of ourselves. I think that recognition is what it comes down to. Like you
Hmm.
just said, like that's where the crux of it all falls.
Yeah. It all comes down to, how do I listen to, I don't know if you listen to Karen Hunter and Dr. Carr on Saturdays.
No.
The thing, oh, you got to tune in. You would love that. But I hear both of them say all the time, it's how we see ourselves and how we see each other.
Hmm.
And that's the bottom line of what it comes down to. There's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be those who don't want to be a part of this. But we have something of value, and it's time that we recognize that, and that we recognize it in each other, and then we recognize what we can do with that, what that means for the continent and for the world. As I mentioned before, I have the Black to Africa movement. And as I said many times on my Instagram page and on the things that I've written about there, that everybody is not going to want to go to Africa, even for a visit. Everybody is just not that interested. But Malcolm X put it perfectly, and I don't have the exact words verbatim what he said, but he basically said that those who do opt to embrace Africa, whether it's through an investment, whether it's through moving there, whether it's through, visiting regularly or whatever, but who have that spiritual connection to Africa, can aid and assist those here who have no desire to go. Those who have no desire to go can still aid and assist those who are making strides and making moves there. We have to get out of the mindset of this all or nothing, that we all have to be in this group or in this lane and we don't pay attention to anything else, and that's why I say that CHOSA is kind of that umbrella where it's like at the end of the day, cool, you're this, cool, you're that, but guess what? We're all CHOSA. So when you need me, even though I might not be over in this lane, when you need me, holler. I'm there. Whatever I can do for you, I'll do it. I may not necessarily agree with you, but I'm going to help in any way that I believe that I can, that I believe is going to help not just you, but that's going to help us in general, the broader us, the whole CHOSA, and vice versa. And that's the mindset that we have to have. And I think that everyone's not going to get it, but as it grows, and even those who do get it, I believe that it's such a positive force that I believe that it really can lead to change within, like I said, how we see ourselves and how we see each other. And that to me changes, it just changes the game, period. That is our branding, our public relations campaign. That's the thing that we choose to control. That's the power that we have. And CHOSA speaks to all of that.
And I think we're going to end it right there.
Thank you so much for having me. I
You're
really
very,
appreciate it. I know I was so, you know, difficult to pin down in the beginning, but I'm really glad that we had this conversation and that you have this space, because I've noticed that you've got some really good conversations that go on here. I don't catch them every week, but every time I do catch them, and the ones that I've saved in my watch later on YouTube, I
oh,
know that they are fire. They are fire. So I appreciate you.
thank you. And I appreciate you taking the time and making the decision to say that this is where you want to start this part of your journey. So I
That's
appreciate that.
it. You're very welcome.
I only hold people hostage for about an hour. So
Okay.
it is safe to say that this has been tonight's couch conversation with the People's Pride Project. Laura Quainoo, thank you very much. You can
You're welcome.
find Laura on Instagram at CHOSA Nation. You can also find her articles on medium.com. Get into it. Follow the project, be part of the project, be loud and willing to call yourself CHOSA. It's just that simple because that's who we are.
That's who we are.
So thank you very, very much. And we'll see y'all next week. Bye.